Two men on the same street read the same headline about benefit cuts on the same morning. They have almost the same amount of money. One of them thinks about it for maybe a minute and then goes out to cut his grass. The other one carries it around all day, brings it to the dinner table, and is still turning it over at 2 in the morning. Now, the easy explanation is that one of them is just a calm person by nature. I do not think that is it, and I have watched this long enough to tell you what I think the difference actually is. One of them has written the bad scenario down on a piece of paper. The other one is keeping it in his head. That sounds too simple to matter. Give me 10 minutes and I will show you why it is the whole thing. I am Sam Whitfield. On this channel, we talk about the part of money that lives between your ears, because after a certain age, that is where most of the damage happens. Nothing here is financial advice for your situation. This is about how people think, and how thinking badly about money costs more than most investment mistakes. Let us be clear about what this episode is not. I am not going to tell you what Congress will do. I do not know, and neither does anybody making a video about it. I am not going to read you projections about trust funds or percentages, because the whole problem I am describing is what those numbers do to a person who has nowhere to put them. What I want to talk about is the loop. Here is what the loop sounds like. You read the headline. Your mind asks a perfectly reasonable question: what happens to me if that occurs? And then, because you have never actually worked out the answer, your mind cannot answer it. So it holds the question open. And an open question does not sit quietly. It comes back while you are driving. It comes back in the grocery line. It comes back at 2 in the morning when there is nothing else competing for the space. That is not anxiety in the clinical sense. That is a filing problem. Your mind is holding a document it has nowhere to file, so it keeps handing it back to you. Your neighbor got the same document, but he has a folder for it. He worked out, on paper, what his life looks like if the worst version of that headline arrives. So when he reads it, his mind asks the same question, gets an answer within about 4 seconds, and closes the file. He is not braver than you. He just did 20 minutes of work at some point that you have not done yet. Now I want to be careful here, because there is a lazy version of this advice that goes around, and I do not want you to hear that instead. The lazy version is, stop worrying about things you cannot control, which is true and completely useless. Nobody has ever stopped worrying because a video told them to. Telling an anxious person to be less anxious is not a plan, it is a wish. What I am telling you is the opposite of that. Do not try to stop the thought. Answer it, once, on paper. And then let the paper hold it instead of your head. So let me show you the exercise, because it is genuinely short. Take one sheet, 3 sections. Section 1, the floor. Write down the income that arrives every month regardless of what happens in the market. For most people, that is Social Security, plus a pension if you have one, plus an annuity if you have one. That is your floor. That number is what you would be living on in the version of the world where everything else went badly. Section 2, the essentials. Write down what 1 month actually costs to keep you housed, fed, medicated, and warm. Not your comfortable budget. The bones: housing, utilities, food, insurance, medicine, transportation. Section 3, the gap. Subtract. Whatever the difference is, positive or negative, that is your actual exposure, not the country's exposure, yours. That is the exercise. Now here is the part nobody tells you. For a large number of people who do this, the gap is smaller than the feeling was. Not zero, but smaller. And the moment you see that on paper, the headline changes size. It stops being a threat to your entire life and becomes a threat to a specific number, and specific numbers can be worked on. For others, the gap is real, and it is uncomfortable. And I am not going to pretend otherwise, or tell you a piece of paper fixes an income shortfall. But even there, something important happens. The problem stops being something bad might happen someday, and becomes, I need to find $300 a month. One of those you can act on. The other one just circles. Now, what do you do with a gap you do not like? You look at the 3 levers that are actually in your hands, and you will notice none of them require predicting policy. The first is the cost side. Housing is the biggest number on almost every page I have ever looked at, and it is also the one most people refuse to touch, because a house is not a line item, it is a life. I am not telling you to move. I am telling you that if your gap is large, the honest conversation is about the house, and having it early while you still have choices is very different from having it late. The second is the income side, not a job necessarily. Part-time work, seasonal work, a skill you already have that somebody will pay for a few hours a week. What surprises people is how small an amount changes the arithmetic on that page. The third is the timing side, and here I am going to stay in my lane. When you claim benefits and how you sequence your accounts genuinely matters, and it is specific enough that it belongs with somebody looking at your actual record, not with me talking to a camera. Notice what all three have in common. They are all things you can start this week. That is the definition of the difference between a worry and a problem. A problem has a next action. A worry does not. I want to tell you about a couple. I will call Ed and Ruth because I watched this happen in real time. Ed retired at 66 from a job he had held for 22 years. Ruth had worked on and off, mostly on. Between them, the monthly income that arrives no matter what covers most of their life, and they have a modest amount in retirement accounts on top of it. By any reasonable measure, they are fine. Ed was not fine. Every few months a headline would set him off, and Ruth told me he would go quiet for 2 or 3 days at a stretch. Not angry, just somewhere else. She said the worst part was that he would never say what he was thinking, so she was left guessing whether it was money or his health or something she had done. What eventually broke it was not a financial decision. It was a Tuesday afternoon and a legal pad. They wrote the floor. They wrote the essentials. They subtracted. And the gap, in the scenario Ed had been carrying around in his head for 2 years, turned out to be about $260 a month. $260. That is what he had been unable to name. And once it had a name, they spent about an hour talking about 3 ways to cover it, and they landed on one that was frankly boring and entirely doable. Ruth told me later that the change was not that Ed became optimistic. He did not. He is not an optimistic man, and he is 71 now. The change was that he stopped going somewhere else for 3 days at a time. The number was on paper, so he was no longer the only place it lived. I tell that story because people expect the payoff of this exercise to be reassurance. Sometimes it is, but the real payoff is smaller and more reliable. The thing stops being infinite. An unnamed fear has no edges, so your mind treats it as though it could be anything, up to and including losing everything. A named number has edges, and edges are what let a person put something down. Let me say something about why this hits our generation particularly hard. Most of us were raised to be self-reliant about money and completely silent about it. You did not discuss what you had, you did not discuss what you were afraid of. So now, you are 65, you read something that scares you, and there is nobody in the house you feel entitled to say it out loud to, because saying it out loud feels like admitting you did not manage things well enough, so it stays inside. And a fear that stays inside grows in a way that a fear said out loud does not. If you take one thing from this, take that one. Say it out loud to somebody once. Your spouse, your brother, the friend you play cards with, not to get advice. Just to move it from inside your head to the middle of the table where you can both look at it. There is a version of you that reads the next headline and feels a small flicker, checks it against a page you wrote months ago, and goes back to your morning. That version is not calmer by temperament. He just did the work once. Now let me deal with the 2 objections I always get when I describe this, because if I do not, they will quietly stop you from doing it. The first objection. What is the point of writing down a plan for something that may never happen? And my answer is that you are already spending energy on it. You are just spending it in the least efficient possible way, in small, useless increments, at night. Writing it down does not add a worry to your life. It converts a recurring worry into a one-time task. You are not choosing between thinking about it and not thinking about it. You are choosing between thinking about it once or thinking about it forever. The second objection is the one people do not say out loud. What if I write it down and the answer is bad? That is the real reason most people never do this exercise, and I want to treat it with respect rather than talk you out of it. Some pages come out ugly. But consider what you are protecting by not looking. You are not protecting yourself from a bad situation. The situation is whatever it is today, whether or not you have looked at it. What you are protecting is your ability to not know, and that protection has an expiry date because the arithmetic eventually arrives on its own schedule, usually at the worst possible moment and usually with fewer options available than you have right now. The most expensive sentence in retirement is, "I would rather not know yet." Every year you say it, the number of moves you have goes down, and I would add one more thing. In 30 years of watching people go through this, I have never once met somebody who looked at the page and wished they had waited longer. And here is the reframe I want to leave you with. Every year of your remaining life is going to contain headlines like this one. That is not pessimism, it is just how news works. If you have not built a way to metabolize them, then the news schedule effectively controls how you sleep, and it will keep doing that for 20 or 30 years. 20 minutes and 1 sheet of paper buys back a lot of nights. So here is my question for the comments. When was the last time a money headline followed you to bed, and what was the question your mind kept asking? Write the question, not the headline. I suspect a lot of us are lying awake over the same 3 or 4 questions, and it would do everybody good to see them written out by somebody else. If this was useful, subscribe. We look at the mental side of money here, the part that decides what you actually do with what you have. And the video I would send you to next is the one on why people who saved all their lives cannot bring themselves to spend it, because it is the same machinery running in the opposite direction. I am Sam. Write it down, then go cut the grass.